Hi friends, welcome to Beautifully Bookish Bethany. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about all the books that I read in the first half of March. Well, it has been a somewhat stressful start to March, I would say, but I've been getting some reading done. I've been reading some good things. I also have a DNF I'm going to talk about. I know I said I wasn't reviewing DNFs anymore, but this is one where I feel like I should just sort of put a word of warning out there to potential readers because I wasn't expecting the book to be what it is. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but I am going to just kind of tell you as a heads up. And then we're going to get into all of the books that I've read in the first half of March. If you are new to my mid-month wrap-ups, the way that these work is I will talk about books in the order that I read them. At the end of the month, I do my whole end-of-month wrap-up with reading stats and go from lowest rated to highest rated. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to talk about books in chronological order. That said, we are going to start with my DNF. I'm a little bummed about this because I was excited for it, but it just was not what I thought it was gonna be. So that book is Firebird by Juliet Cross. This is being pitched as kind of a dark romantasy. It's like House of the Dragon meets From Blood and Ash. What is not said explicitly in the description of the book that I think a lot of people might want to know is that this is a slave master romance dynamic. So the heroine is part of a racial minority in kind of the fantasy version of the Roman Empire, and the hero is the man enslaving her, and he's also a dragon shifter. So that's heads up. I did not know going in that that was going to be the dynamic. It's not something I'm comfortable with. I DNF'd it. Again, this is not explained explicitly in the back of the book, and as much as it sounded right up my alley, this was sadly not what I was expecting. So just a heads up to other readers so that if you decide to pick it up, you know what you're getting into. With that said, let's go ahead and talk about the books that I finished. The first thing that I finished this month was Paper Doll by Dylan Mulvaney. I had this as an audio review copy from NetGalley, and I was really excited to pick it up because I love Dylan. I've been following her journey on TikTok for a couple of years now, I would say. She's a pretty well-known trans influencer who started out with documenting her journey of transitioning, and she's just really delightful. She reads the audiobook herself, which is fun, and I will say that the memoir is written in the same way that she talks, so it sort of feels like you're just getting a much longer version of her videos, albeit ones that are, I would say, even more open and raw about certain things that she's gone through, kind of the behind the scenes, some of the blow-ups that happened on social media. So I feel like if you know Dylan and you've been following her, this is a really great book to pick up, and I would definitely recommend it. I think she does a good job as well of acknowledging the privilege that she has as a highly visible trans woman who has had a lot of opportunities that are not always as accessible for other trans people. And she gets into some of that too, some of the missteps that she had along the way and the way that she's learned from other trans women and people of the trans community. So, you know, especially in this day and age where we have so much anti-trans legislation going on, I think it's really great to read books and follow trans creators, and I think Dylan is just delightful. So I gave this 4.5 stars, and I would definitely recommend it, especially if you already like her. Then I read Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. I was gifted this book from the publisher, so thank you so much to William Morrow. This was really interesting because it's different than anything else Nnedi Okorafor has written in the past. I've read a lot of what she's written, and usually she writes African futurist science fiction with fantasy elements woven in sometimes. This is something else entirely. I would call it literary fiction with a speculative element to it. It's got a bit of a sci-fi twist, but it is largely contemporary fiction with a lit fic vibe, following a disabled Nigerian American woman who is sort of a spitfire who teaches writing and has been trying to get published forever, and then loses her job and sort of very quickly writes this sci-fi book called Rusted Robots that ends up becoming a huge bestseller unexpectedly and kind of overnight, leading to some various opportunities. And then in between, you get snippets of Rusted Robots, which is the book that she wrote. So I won't go into spoilers with this, but I loved it. Again, it's not what you've maybe come to expect from her, but I think it's such a smart and nuanced approach to talking about disability and the different kinds of choices people make and the way that those are received. It also talks about the treatment of authors and things like film adaptations and some of the things that go along with that and how we think about literature and storytelling and humanity. I loved it, and I loved the ending. Like, I was really liking it, and then for me, the ending of this book just sort of like bumped it up. So for me, this was a 5-star read. It's funny because through a lot of the book, I was like, okay, this is like 4.5, like I'm really enjoying it. There are parts of the Rusted Robot snippets that I was like, okay, this is like not as interesting as the main narrative, but the way that it all came together at the end was just perfection for me. So yeah, if that sounds up your alley, something that is a little more lit fic with a little bit of sci-fi mixed in and dealing with some of those themes, I would definitely pick it up. Again, for me, this was a 5-star read. I thought it was great. Then I read The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. I had a copy for review from the publisher, so thank you so much to them. This, again, is a book from an author that I love that is very different from what they typically write. So Stephen Graham Jones is an Indigenous horror writer, and this is still horror, but it is historical horror. So a lot of it reads like historical fiction. It's pretty slow paced for a lot of it. When I was reading it, you know what it really reminded me of was like Interview with a Vampire. That was kind of the vibe, except if the vampire was Indigenous and there's a revenge plot as well. It's also got nested storytelling, which is kind of cool. So we've got a contemporary framing device with an adjunct professor who gets access to this newly discovered manuscript that was written by her grandfather, who was a preacher in the early 1900s American West. And he documents his interaction with this Blackfeet man who tells him his story and is this vampire. And then it sort of all comes full circle by the end of the book. I think it is really good. It's definitely slow at times. I feel like this is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but if you like historical fiction and you want a way to sort of dip your toes in horror where it's not that intense, this might be a good option for you. I would say that this is, I mean, it definitely has horrific moments in it, of course it does, but compared to most of the other things I've read from Stephen Graham Jones, this is like relatively quieter and tamer, and I think really focused on the history of the treatment of Indigenous people, and it's really good. And I gave this book 4 stars. Next, I listened to The Fall Risk by Abby Jimenez. I had an audio review copy from NetGalley, and this was really cute. It is a romance short story, so I feel like there's only so much you can do with a short story to a certain extent if you're writing romance, but I enjoyed it. It follows 2 people who are neighbors who unexpectedly end up stuck in their second-story apartments for a weekend when construction workers accidentally remove the staircase down to the ground floor and they can't get it fixed until Monday. What I do think is interesting, because Abby Jimenez always likes to tackle bigger issues in the books that she's writing, and so even in this short story, what I think it does really well is it tackles stalkers and the lack of protection that the legal system typically gives to women with stalkers. So the heroine has somebody who's been kind of following her, and while she has a restraining order, they can't really do much unless he has actively attacked her. And unfortunately, that is the case. And so it's interesting because it's unpacking a little bit of that while also being this very short, cute romance story between these 2 people with forced proximity for a weekend. So I liked it. I gave it 4 stars. This is an Amazon original, so you can find it there. Then I read The In-Between Bookstore by Edward Underhill. I picked this up at an event that Avon Books invited me to because I had heard somebody raving about it because they're queer book club Reddit, and so I was like, oh yeah, let me read that. It's really good. It's not a romance, and I think that's important to know. It has romantic elements to it, but I would not call this a romance. It's contemporary fiction about a trans man who loses his job and ends up going back to the small town in middle America that he grew up in to stay with his mom while he figures out what he's doing. And he goes back to the bookstore that he used to work at as a teenager before transitioning, and going into the store works kind of like a portal in time, and he ends up interacting with his younger self. And it's just really lovely. It got me thinking a lot about my adolescence and early adulthood and the ways that we sometimes are so caught up in what's happening to us and in our own world that we miss what's going on with other people. And yeah, it was great. It's a really beautifully written, thought-provoking book, and I would definitely recommend it. I gave this book 4.5 stars. Definitely more of an emotional read, but yeah, very good. I'm glad it was recommended to me. Then I read Survivor by Octavia E. Butler. This is her one book that is out of print because she didn't like it very much. I managed to get my hands on a copy, and I'm very, very happy about it. I ended up reading about the first third of this physically, and then I was able to find a PDF online to continue with it just because it's so delicate. And so as much as I love having this for my collection, I was like, maybe it's good to like read this as an ebook. So that was a good choice. This is a really interesting book and people have mixed feelings about it. I actually quite liked it. I can kind of see why she may not have felt as good about it. It feels maybe less polished than some of her other books. Like there's less of the sort of nuanced layers woven into it that you normally get. I mean, there's still some of that. She's still a fantastic writer, but from what I know of her history, it seems like she maybe rushed this and published it because she needed the money before it was really ready. This she called her Star Trek book because in it we've got human characters who have gone into space and are living on another planet with sentient beings that they're in a community with. There's multiple groups of these aliens that are sort of fighting each other, and the missionary group of humans that she was with are with this one group, and then their enemies had captured the heroine and taken her away. And so we have the timeline when she gets captured, and then this timeline when she is now coming back to her community with them, and it's very interesting. It's dealing with addiction and racism and the ways that we other people. One thing that I think some people are uncomfortable with, which I get, is that she ends up married to one of these aliens, and the early parts of their relationship are definitely like questionably consensual. I think in this case I'm a little less bothered by it because one, this isn't a romance, so it's not about like rooting for the couple to get together so much as when you're reading an actual romance, but also because she's tying it into cultural differences in the way that they approach mating and relationships, which I think is pretty interesting. And ultimately they do end up having a pretty respectful relationship, even though it is abusive and questionably consensual at the beginning. Yeah, this was very interesting. I do think it's worth reading because it fills in some major gaps in the Patternist series, because you get a little bit of a jump in some of the books of things happening that you're like, wait, what is going on? And so reading this, I'm like, oh, okay, this kind of like fills in some gaps for me. So I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I don't know, I really liked it. I feel like people are mixed on this one, but I thought it was very good. And now that I've officially read all of her stuff, I can make a sort of where to start with Octavia Butler video, which I've been thinking about. I'm trying to decide like how I want to approach it, partly because of a nonfiction book about her that I also read this month, which we're gonna get to, but yeah, I read Survivor, 5 stars. I really liked it. Actually, you know what? Let's just talk about that book now. It's like 2 books from here, but we're just gonna get into it. So I listened to Octavia E. Butler, H is for Horse by Chi Ming Yang. This was really interesting. It is coming out from an academic press, and I had an audio review copy from NetGalley. So it is a nonfiction book looking at Octavia Butler's juvenilia, so her collection of writings from when she was a child and a teenager when she was really young. And some of this is fiction, some of this is her notes. All of that stuff is held, and she was a prolific writer and she kept everything. And there's a lot of it that's never been looked at really or written about. And so this academic author decided to write something about it. What's really interesting is she decided to format it like an ABC book. So like H is for horse, because she was obsessed with horses. And so it kind of uses the alphabet to talk about different elements of what we learn from this in a non-linear way. I found it fascinating. I would recommend this if you're a fan of Octavia Butler. It's definitely worth checking out. It's interesting because there's a lot of storylines and characters from books in like the Patternist series, for instance, that originate with stories and characters that she was writing as a 12-year-old. Now, obviously, they've been adapted and matured and changed, but it's pretty amazing to see where some of that stuff originated. So we learn a lot about what her life was like, where she lived, the settings and the different media she was consuming that might have influenced her writing. The other thing that we find out, though, and this is what I'm kind of thinking a lot about, is, now, to be fair, like, the author does not explicitly say what I'm going to, and I think with good reason, because we don't know anything for sure, and Octavia Butler is no longer with us, so who can say? But there are some strong indications that she may have been the victim of sexual abuse as a child, possibly by a boyfriend her mom had. Again, we don't know this for sure, but there's definitely indications that that could have been the case. And the other thing with that has me kind of rethinking my feelings on some of her books is she wrote some stories as a young person. I want to say around 13. I don't remember the exact age, but she wrote some stories that have what I would probably call child sexual abuse in them, but she frames them as being consensual, even though maybe not so much. Like, there's a story about a very young child who has a sexual relationship with an adult man and other people and supposedly wants that. The author of this book frames those stories as sort of, you know, something that might be called rape, being taken back as like an empowering choice for young women or something like that, which is an interesting perspective to take on it. Now, I definitely know that people who are victims of abuse like this process that in many different ways, and some of them write about it, and that's part of how they process their trauma, and that is absolutely okay. I just think it reframes a little bit my feelings about books like Fledgling, which does have somebody who's in a body that looks like an 11-year-old human girl, but is actually an adult sort of vampire who has a relationship with a human man. And it's like, some of the intimate scenes in that are written in a way that is definitely uncomfortable to read. I feel like, I don't know, it was always one of my favorite books of hers because of what she's doing in it thematically in the book as a whole, even though there was discomfort with that. I don't know how I feel knowing that maybe some of that could potentially be coming out of her own childhood trauma. I don't know, you know what I mean? So that was a really interesting read. There's a lot more than just that about her. She's still a phenomenal author, of course, but yeah, and you know, and how do you process something during a time when we weren't talking about these things publicly in the way that we do now? Anyway, it's complicated. Very interesting, though. If you're a fan of Octavia Butler, I would recommend it. I also read A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. This was on my challenge TBR for the year. It is a lengthy essay that she wrote about women in fiction, and it was fascinating. It took me a long time to read because the writing is really dense and there's a lot of metaphor and a lot of things going on, but she's surprisingly funny at times and has some really interesting ideas. I don't want to get into all of it here just because I feel like it would be kind of long, but but I did write quite a bit about this in my Goodreads review, and my Goodreads is always linked down below if you want to go and check it out. Overall, I liked this. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I think it's really interesting as a classic feminist text to look at how she was thinking about the place of women in writing and the way that expectations of them and lack of access to financial freedom and things like that impact their ability to be creative. She's got a lot of really interesting ideas here. I think there are criticisms that could be made as well. And some of her ideas about gender are like, from one perspective, could be seen as weirdly progressive, sort of, but also are not. I don't know. It's a really interesting little book. So I would recommend reading it if that sounds of interest to you. And again, if you want to hear some of my more detailed thoughts, maybe go check out that Goodreads review, but I'm glad that I tried it. It was interesting. I need to change the battery and then we will be back with more books. And we are back. Next, I read The River Has Roots by Amal El-Mohtar. This is her first novella that she's written by herself, and it is beautiful. Like, as a physical object, this book is beautiful. It's illustrated throughout and it's gorgeous. I love it. Also, this is fun. It's got like this makes sense if you've read it, but it's got a chicken. This is a retelling of a ballad that kind of modernizes it, and it is a story about sisters. It also has a queer romantic subplot to it that I love, and it reads like a fairy tale. This is the sort of book that when I first started reading it, I was like, wait, what? Like, I feel like my brain had to reset, if that makes sense, where I had to stop and like start again and read it aloud to myself to get like the rhythm of it. But the rhythm of the way that it's written is like a fairy tale, which makes sense because again, it's retelling a ballad. It's got this gorgeous lyrical element to it. Some of the logic is fairy tale logic that makes sense like that, but then there's also elements of this larger world building that we get introduced that's really cool. The magic system is interesting because it's drawing on language and the use of grammar as having transformative power, which I think is kind of cool. I was lucky enough to get to go to an event where the author talked about writing this book and how, while the characters are quite different, pieces of this are drawing on her relationship with her sister and the way that she also weaves in Lebanese mythology, the story that is very British or drawing on a British ballad. I thought this was beautiful. I loved it. I think the ending is perfection. It's bittersweet and it was gorgeous. This was 5 stars, easy 5 stars. I was sent a copy for review from the publisher, so heads up about that. But I was so excited and I got to go and get my book signed, which was amazing. And she was so lovely. That was really cool. She's one of the authors of If You Lose the Time War, which is her big kind of bestseller. She's written poetry in the past, and yeah, this was gorgeous. Then I read Swim Team by Johnny Christmas. I have a physical copy somewhere, but my children have absconded with it, so I'm just gonna put a picture of it here. This is a middle grade graphic novel that's really good. It follows a young Black girl who is moving from her home in Brooklyn to Florida with her dad. She's in middle school and she really wants to get into this math games class, but it's full, and she ends up in Swim 101 and she does not know how to swim. She's scared of swimming, and so part of this is about her learning to face her fears. Turns out she's a great swimmer. Once she gets into it, she ends up on the swim team and is making new friends. And so all of that kind of relatable story is woven together with this information that they slowly learn about American history and the history of segregation in swimming pools and beaches and the impact of the restrictions placed on Black people in decreasing the ability of parents to pass on knowledge of swimming and being comfortable in water to their children, and that being part of why there's been generations of Black people who are less likely to know how to swim and kind of pushing back on that. And I think that's great. We're getting important history woven into this lovely story about friendship and facing your fears and growing and dealing with being in a new place. It was really good. I gave this 4 stars. Maybe it should be a 4.5. It was like right on the edge there, but I feel like I've just been liking most of what I've been reading, which is great. Then I listened to The Warbler by Sarah Beth Durst. I had an audio review copy from NetGalley, and this is yet another book where it's very different from other things that I've read from an author. Sarah Beth Durst has written a lot across all different age categories and primarily writes fantasy. And this novel is interesting because while it does have magical realism, a lot of it reads more like just contemporary fiction or women's fiction. It's an intergenerational narrative following three perspectives of a woman, her mother, and her grandmother in different time periods, all as young women. And the main character, set in like mid-2000s, main character is a woman dealing with a curse that's been passed down to her from her mother, where if she stays in one place for longer than 10 months or like sets down roots anywhere, she will turn into a tree. And this is what happened to her mother at the end of her life. And so she spent her whole life never having roots, never settling anywhere. And now she comes to this small town in Massachusetts where things are about to change because she's also been trying to find a way to undo this curse, to break the curse. And in this small town, she finally finds some information that she didn't know. And then it follows her mom's perspective and her grandmother's perspective. And I won't spoil anything, but I thought this was such a beautiful story. It has magical realism elements to it, but it's really the story about women of different generations and the ways that we try to do the best for our children and maybe pass on some of our own trauma, and the way that freedom and what freedom means looks different for different people. It's got love stories woven into it. It was really lovely. Again, very different, but her writing is so easy to read, and I also gave this 4 stars. Then I did a reread of Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas. The live show for this is near the end of the month on my channel, so come check that out if you're interested. I won't say too much because again, we're gonna do a whole live show discussing it, but my feelings on this honestly are pretty similar to the first time I read it, and my rating stayed the same, which I think is unpopular, but I gave this 3.5 stars. I have such mixed feelings about this book. I think in some ways it's a fantastic finale to the series. It wraps things up really well. There's a lot of great moments in it. I also think it is too long. It has too many perspectives. It's got too many battle scenes that are kind of boring. I just think often, for me at least, I don't think Sarah's strength is writing battle scenes. And I mean, it's a book about war, so I kind of get it, but we really could have glossed over it. It was too much. In my opinion, too much. The other thing is there's so much going on. There's so many character perspectives that we're following. That also felt like too much. And I get that she wanted to wrap all of these up, but I wish that instead we'd gotten maybe like bonus short stories or a novella or something instead of having to give us all their perspectives, because then what we also end up with is so many couples getting together and having moments where they're hooking up. Like it's a lot. It feels repetitive, and I feel like it takes away, for me at least, of the emotional impact of the individual couples. So I'm like, oh, and them. So I don't know. 3.5 stars is where I land with this. There are things that are great about it. I like the way it ties into the wider world. I do like it as an ending for the series, but like, it's a lot. So it should be an interesting conversation because I think a lot of people love it way more than I do. We'll see. We'll see what happens. 2 more books to talk about. The next one is Cabin Fever by Jack Harbin. So I'm going to tell you that this is a rarity for me. I do not usually review erotica on my channel, but I know the author, I love their books, and so when they reached out and asked if I'd be willing to review this, I was like, yes, definitely, of course, send it over. And no surprise, it takes what is, yes, like a very, very steamy erotic novella, and then adds something more to it, gives it tenderness and heart, and it deals with mental health, with depression, and the complexities of coming out of a depressive episode, which is beautiful. I feel like it kind of elevates it a little bit, if that makes sense. So this follows a young man who's been dealing with depression for the past year, and his father runs a business and ends up sick, and so he has to go on this yearly business retreat and run it while his dad isn't there. He ends up in a cabin with 3 older men who, as it turns out, every year, once a year only on this retreat, they kind of get together and get it on, and he ends up getting involved with all of that. So I won't go into detail. It is quite steamy. There are certain things that happen at moments that are not like totally my thing, but I think it's really well written. I think a lot of people are gonna like it. And again, I like the emotional arc that the main character goes on and the journey that he goes on through the novella. So for me, this was a 4-star read. I definitely recommend checking out Jack Harbin. Jack Harbin is what they write under, but Bree is a non-binary trans femme author who writes queer, steamy romance and erotica, so definitely go check it out. It was 4 stars for me, and it is out very soon. Lastly, we are unfortunately going to end this video on a disappointing note. I read Chaos King by Kaysen Callender. This is the second book in a YA fantasy series with polyamory, and I loved book one. I think book one was fantastic. It wasn't talked about enough. It deserved more attention. I thought it was going to be a duology, but after reading this, I don't think it's going to be a duology, and this really felt like a middle book, and not in the best of ways. I don't want to get into too much detail here because it is the second book in a series. This is another one where I'm going to say if you want to hear more detailed thoughts on this, go check out my Goodreads review because I did write a lengthier Goodreads review. But I'll just say this was disappointing. It wasn't a bad book, but there were parts of it that were kind of dull. I feel like it lost a lot of the emotional intensity of the relationship between the characters who are in a triad. And to be fair, a lot of authors struggle with this, that once you have an established relationship, a lot of authors really struggle to maintain the chemistry and the tension. And I think this tries to use plot things that are pulling them apart to do that. But I didn't feel some things that I should have felt, especially with some spoilery things that happened that should have been more emotionally impactful. I felt we didn't get it. On a macro level, I like what this book is doing. I like what the series is doing and sort of the journey that our main character is going on, because it's dealing with class and racial disparities and the push-pull between like the status quo and rebels who want to overthrow everything, and where do you go with that? What do you support? And what do you do when there's no option that's going to keep everybody safe? People are going to die no matter what you do. I think big picture is really interesting. On a micro level, it just didn't come together the way I might have liked, and I didn't really like the ending. This, though, is a personal preference. It does some things that I rarely like in speculative fiction in the ending, and I was like, oh, we're doing that. So other people may have totally different feelings on that than me, but the ending, I feel, brought it even further down. So this probably would have been like a 3-star, but then the ending, for me, it's like a 2.5, if I'm being real honest. So it was a little bit of a bummer. I think maybe if you loved book one and you go in with measured expectations and you don't have the same taste in the sci-fi things that you do and don't like, maybe you'll get on better than I did with it. But for me, it was a little disappointing. So that was like a bummer. I do still love the way, though, that it deals with gender and sexuality, and that as much as it is a really oppressive system, the fact that one of the love interests is quite literally physically gender fluid is no big deal. And I think that's cool. So, you know, like there are pieces of this that I like. I just wish it had come together differently. So yeah, 2.5 stars. Those are all of the books that I read in the first half of March. Overall, it's been a pretty good month. I've enjoyed the majority of the things that I've read, and I'm currently reading some things that I'm really enjoying, so I'm looking forward to seeing where things go, and hopefully the rest of the month is a little less stressful on a personal note than things have been. So talk to me in the comments down below. Let me know any of your thoughts. If you got this far in the video, leave me an emoji with tears because we're feeling disappointed about that last book, which is a bummer. So you can do that as a way to interact with this video. Or for a question of the day, talk to me about a time that an author you love did something different than what they typically do. That, I think, has been a big theme in today's video. I had 3 books by authors who I've read a lot from who were doing something quite different, and I generally liked it, but you know, like not everybody wants something different from an author. Have you had that experience? Let me know in the comments down below what that was and how that went for you. If you like this video, it always helps if you give it a thumbs up. Subscribe if you want to see more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.